An original podcast from podlatino.com.
There's a phrase that almost everyone has said at some point, or heard someone close to them say. It comes right after losing something, after not getting what you were looking for, after being left out of something you really wanted. And it sounds something like this. It didn't really matter that much to me anyway. Or maybe, it wasn't that great. Or the more elaborate version. Honestly, I don't think I even needed it. Those words come fast, almost without thinking, like some kind of automatic reflex. And what's interesting is that there's a very old story that captured exactly that. With an image so simple, it lodged itself into collective memory for centuries. It's the story of a fox and a bunch of grapes he couldn't reach. The scene is short, almost minimal. A fox is walking through the countryside and suddenly spots a cluster of grapes hanging from a vine. The grapes are ripe, dark, full. The fox looks at them and wants them. There's no hesitation, no ambiguity. He wants them, and he decides to go for it. So he jumps. Doesn't make it. Tries again. Still nothing. He shifts his position, tries a different angle, a bigger push. Nothing changes. The grapes just hang there, calmly, completely indifferent to all the effort being made to reach them. The fox jumps again and again and again. The result is always the same. At some point, he stops, walks away, and as he goes, almost to himself, he says those grapes were probably sour anyway. Not worth it. He didn't want them that badly. And that's where the story ends. No chase, no rival, no moral spoken out loud inside the tale. Just a fox walking away, convinced, or at least pretending to be, that what he couldn't have wasn't worth having in the first place. What makes this fable so powerful is that the fox is neither a villain nor a fool. In many other stories, the fox is the clever one, the one who outsmarts everyone else when brute force fails. Here he's clever too, in his own way. Because what he does at the end isn't quietly giving up or honestly admitting defeat. He does something far more human. He builds an explanation that lets him move on without feeling bad. He decides the problem wasn't his inability to reach the grapes, but the quality of the grapes themselves. He tells himself a different story than the one that actually happened, and that new story is a lot more comfortable than the truth. That's what makes this fox feel so familiar. Not because his little failed jumps are funny, but because his final reaction is exactly what many people would do in his place. Frustration hurts. Admitting that something was out of reach isn't easy. And when the thing you want is right there, visible, concrete, almost close enough to touch, but not quite, the gap between desire and reality can become very uncomfortable. The fox's solution is to turn that gap into irrelevance. If the grapes were sour, then it was never really a loss. If they weren't worth it, then the failed effort doesn't matter either. The problem disappears, at least in the story the fox tells himself. This story is attributed to Aesop, the Greek fable teller whose actual historical existence is hard to pin down, but whose name became associated with a large collection of short animal tales. Many of those stories are believed to have circulated orally before ever being written down, and over time they were gathered and rewritten by different people. The fable of the fox and the grapes also appears in the work of Phaedrus, a Latin writer who adapted many stories from the Greek tradition, and later in the work of Jean de La Fontaine, the French poet of the 17th century, who rewrote hundreds of fables with a carefully crafted literary style. Each one shaped the story in their own way, but the core always stayed the same. The fox, the grapes, the failed jump, and the excuse at the end. The fact that this story survived so many centuries and appeared across so many different cultures says something about what it captures. It's not describing a rare problem or an extreme situation. It's describing something completely ordinary, something that barely needs explaining because most people recognize it immediately, either in themselves or in someone they know well. In the 20th century, psychology gave this mechanism a name. It was called rationalization, and it's part of what some researchers described as cognitive dissonance. That discomfort that arises when what we think about ourselves doesn't line up with what's actually happening. When someone sees themselves as capable, intelligent, deserving of something, and then doesn't get it, that contradiction creates tension. One way to ease that tension without questioning your own self-image is to change how much the thing was worth to begin with. If the grapes were sour, if the job wasn't that great, if the person wasn't as interesting as they seemed, then not getting it doesn't say anything bad about you. The world fell short, not me. The circumstances weren't right, not my abilities. It's a neat solution to an internal problem, even if it isn't entirely honest. And this shows up in very concrete, everyday situations. Someone doesn't get selected for a job and suddenly remembers all the reasons that job never fully appealed to them. Someone tries to connect with another person and it doesn't work out, and then quickly recalls every little thing they didn't like about that person. Someone misses an opportunity and, before long, has built a whole story where that opportunity was overrated, where it probably would have caused more problems than it was worth. It doesn't always happen consciously. Often it moves fast and automatically, before there's any time to stop and ask whether any of it is actually true. What the fable doesn't do, and this matters, is condemn the fox. It doesn't frame him as a liar or a coward. It shows someone facing an uncomfortable situation and finding the exit he can manage. There's something understandable in that. The frustration was real, the desire was genuine, and not everyone is immediately ready to look a defeat straight in the eye without any kind of cushion. The fox's excuse isn't admirable, but it isn't monstrous either. It's human. The interesting question isn't whether it's right or wrong to reach for that kind of excuse. It's whether you can recognize it when it shows up, because there's a real difference between using it as a temporary shield and staying inside that false story permanently. The fox who walks away saying the grapes were sour might be okay for a little while. But if that fox never learns to jump higher, or finds another way to reach the grapes, or accepts that some things simply won't be within reach, then the excuse stops being a momentary relief and becomes a habit that keeps him from ever trying again. The fable is only a few lines long in its oldest versions. It doesn't need more. The image is clear enough to work on its own, with no decoration required. A fox, some grapes, a failed jump, and a phrase that everyone recognizes because everyone, at some point, has said it, or at least thought it. The phrase that says it didn't matter. It wasn't that great, probably better this way. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes, if you pause for just a moment, you might notice the grapes are still there, still looking pretty good, and that maybe it's worth finding another way up.